Great, thanks so much, Marcos. My name is Teresa Strachilla. I'm a program manager with the City of Boston's Grow Boston Office of Urban Agriculture. I'm going to share my screen here and give a little bit of a context for the upcoming developer presentations. All right. So I'll just do some introductions of folks who are on the call related to the 115 to 123 Bird Street presentations. Talk very briefly about the land disposition process and timeline, provide an overview of the RFP, and then we'll go into the developer presentations. And then once they wrap up, I'll briefly talk about next steps. So as I mentioned, I'm Teresa Strachilla. I'm the program manager for the Grassroots program, which I'll talk about again briefly, and managing this project from the City of Boston side. We also have a few members of our team here who are also on the call. So I know, Alexa, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Alexa. I'm the program coordinator for Grow Boston. I'm here supporting Teresa's work.
Great, thanks, Alexa. I'm not sure if Nora, are you on the call? I don't think I see Nora. And then additionally, on the line is Shawnee Fletcher, the director of Grow Boston, who's not able to be on the screen this evening. We will be sharing, we're all part of the evaluation committee for this RFP that was released, and we'll be sharing this information that's received tonight with the remainder of the evaluation committee who's not able to attend. We also have two development teams, the Trustees of Reservations and Boston Farms Community Land Trust. I'll allow each of those teams to introduce themselves when they get to their presentation. So as I mentioned, I'm part of Grow Boston, the City of Boston's Office of Urban Agriculture, whose goal is to help increase food production and support food producers in the city, which is part of the Mayor's Office of Housing. And specifically, I manage the Grassroots program, which provides city-owned land, grant funding, and technical assistance to neighborhood groups and nonprofit organizations for open spaces, including community gardens and urban farms. So there's an RFP that was released for 115 to 123 Bird Street, one parcel, which I have a map of that I'll show in just a moment. I wanted to just provide this slide as context for the land disposition process. We have been through site identification, development feasibility analysis, a number of public meetings to set the context and to understand what community would like to see. An RFP was issued for the parcel. An RFP is a request for proposals. And we're at the point of evaluating the RFP responses that were received, including community feedback. And as part of that process, we've asked the developers who submitted eligible proposals to provide this presentation to the community and to answer questions and receive community feedback here. After this, we'll move to ranking a developer designation recommendation, at which point we would move into working specifically with that developer to finalize their design, financing, and permitting before transferring the land to the developer and the construction beginning. All of MOH's procurement process and the sale of land is governed by state law, which requires a fair, open, and competitive process, and under which we are soliciting meaningful comparisons of offers based on the information provided in the RFP. So this is the parcel here on the map at 115 to 123 Bird Street. It's at the corner of Bird Street and Alexander, just across from the Fairmont commuter rail line. One parcel totaling just under 11,000 square feet. And the site design and objectives that were identified through community engagement, including with various SDC meetings in the past, were that the site is to be used for urban agriculture, with a preference for an urban farm with a single entity responsible for management, at least one public seating area, site beautification along the sidewalks, preservation of the existing mature trees on the site, and including a permanent protection for the land via a land trust. The RFP also made available $150,000 in capital grant funding for projects that must be awarded to a nonprofit organization, for projects that would be open to the public in some capacity and made regularly available for community use. I'm not going to dig through this whole slide, but I will share these slides with DSNI for distribution if folks would like to see. There was an extensive community process that informed the RFP, leading to its release in January of this year, including a number of meetings, some door knocking, and actually going all the way back to a Magnolia Alexander corridor planning process in 2015. So the release of this RFP is the culmination of an extensive community process to understand how folks would like to see the site used. And here's a photo of the site in the winter. Towards the back, you can see where there are a couple of larger mature trees, which are the trees that we did ask to be preserved in the RFP. Now I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to the folks at the Trustees of Reservations. Folks, I do have, for who I know there are a couple on the line, I do have your presentation up. And so if you, while you're presenting, can just let me know when you're ready for me to change the slides.
Ready to go? Thank you so much for having me. I'm Jordan Takvorian. I'm a pleasure to be here, and best of luck to Boston Farms. Next slide, please. Just to introduce the development team from the trustees, left to right, yours truly on the left, Jordan Takvorian. I've been with the trustees for 8 years now as stewardship manager. I manage 56 community gardens around the city of Boston that total about 15 acres of space and include upwards of 1,600 individual plots. My background is in horticulture and conservation. Front and center is our leader, Vice President of Urban Outdoors, Vijay Tiku. She has a background in architecture and urban design and has been working with the trustees in Boston for approaching 20 years. On the far right, Josh Hassenfuss. He works statewide for the trustees for the past 14 years as a landscape construction specialist. He regularly manages budgets of $500,000 to well over $1 million for major projects for the trustees. Next slide, please. If you are unfamiliar with the trustees, we are a land trust founded in 1891 by noted landscape architect Charles Eliot. Charles Eliot envisioned a way to preserve open space across the Commonwealth that saves spaces of historic, cultural, or scenic value. At this point in 2024, we saved over 125 properties everywhere from P-Town to Williamstown. And those properties encompass everything from coastline, historic homes, public gardens, hiking trails, and so much more. Pictured here is Stevens Coolidge House and Gardens in North Andover. It is a charming country home filled with antiques, wetland, lush, beautiful gardens. As you can see here, it is regularly planted with over 100,000 tulip bulbs for fabulous spring displays. Next slide, please. A few relevant projects from the past few years to highlight for you. This past winter, our Winthrop Street Community Garden in Roxbury, we completely gutted and expanded into an adjacent vacant lot. The garden now features over 30 individual plots, including 5 raised beds. It also has a concrete patio that regularly hosts large events. Pictured here is the opening day event with quite a few people. This gives you a little bit of an idea of how we build our garden spaces with wide accessible pathways, plots that are often 10 by 20 feet in size so that people can grow a lot of different food items and really sustain food budgets. This site was interesting. When we took on the vacant lot, we tested the soil and found that it was contaminated. So at the advice of a licensed site professional, we opted to cap the site and bring in an additional 2 feet of soil to ensure that the food being grown here is healthy and nutritious for years to come. Next slide, please. At the same time that we were doing the Winthrop renovation, we also tackled the Berkeley Community Garden in the South End. Berkeley, as you can see here, is a massive garden featuring over 150 plots, and it runs the length of a city block. The garden is roughly divided into 3 sections, the A, B, and C row, with the A row to the right of this central pathway. The fence along the Dwight Alley here was in poor condition, mixed mash of materials. So over the winter, we completely demolished that as well as the rest of the A row and built it from scratch, bringing in new soil, new plot dividers, those fences, building those entrance gates. And now about 30 people in that section have brand new healthy soil and a really attractive growing space. Next slide, please. The Windermere Community Garden on Jones Hill in Upham's Corner was a garden that we built completely from scratch in 2016. This was an interesting vacant lot, as you can sort of tell from Jones Hill, is a bit sloped. So the garden was built terraced with 4 different sections. This also gives you an idea of how we build and maintain gardens. We want them to be treasured aspects of their neighborhood where people, even if they are not a member of that garden, if they just live in the neighborhood or are visiting, they take pride in it and they're just happy it's there and it looks like it will be there forever because it is. So we install these nice, attractive steel picket fences out front. Whenever possible, we use materials like the concrete pathway so that they are accessible and they last for years to come. You can sort of see in the background there, granite risers for the water system, fieldstone, retaining walls, anything to make the garden look like it is there forever and that people will cherish it. This photo is taken a little bit in the off season, but you can tell that there's a nice attractive perennial border on the sides and the rear of the garden. And even though the garden is divided into plots, we make the effort to ensure that it always looks attractive and like it is being maintained by one person, that is, of course, the trustees. So we work with our gardeners to ensure that every plot is maintained, no weeds are taking over. In the wintertime, we are cutting down any standing dead vegetation, laying down vertical growing structures, anything again to make the garden look attractive in all seasons. Next slide, please. To talk a little bit about diversity and inclusion at the trustees, that is a paramount pillar for the trustees. I'll highlight here just a few of the projects that we've engaged in the last year to ensure that we are meeting our DBIE goals. Top left, the Bessie Barnes Community Garden in Roxbury. As you can sort of tell from this photo, every plot in this garden is elevated by approximately 2 feet, which can make it hard to access. The gardeners in this garden are almost all age 65 or older, and they voiced concerns that it was hard to get to their plot. So over the winter, we were able to install these ramps, and even in the winter time, now we're getting into early spring, I see people out there with strollers or their walkers, and they can really stay active, not only in the garden that they've been in for years and oftentimes decades, but active in their community, which is a huge boon for everyone. To the right of that, you can see the sign for the Virginia Monadnock Garden in Dorchester. Boston is a very diverse city with many languages spoken. This past January, we installed over 80 signs on our front entrances that are multilingual. The languages chosen are representative of the languages spoken not only in the garden, but also in the neighborhood. The signs are in upwards of 7 or 8 languages, including Haitian and Cape Verdean Creole, Arabic, and Spanish. Bottom left, we fly pride flags at a number of our gardens in June, but all of our gardeners, or most all of our gardeners, I would think all of our gardeners, want them up all year round. So we fly them honestly all summer, spring, and fall, taking them down only in winter so that the storms don't damage them. Bottom right, going back to the Winthrop Street Community Garden that I mentioned a few minutes ago, we always want to ensure that the voices of the local community are heard. And when we started the community process for this site for the renovation, community members expressed that the Black Panther Party was a prominent feature, not only in this neighborhood, but on this site in decades past. And they wanted to pay tribute to all their great work. So we were able to install this entrance gate to honor them. And you can't really tell from this photo, but we also installed 10 pillars throughout the garden for their 10-point plan. So it's a wonderful, wonderful new aspect for the Roxbury community. In terms of building this new garden space, we will always want to work with minority and women-owned businesses whenever possible. In the past, we've used such companies as Yard and a Half and Yard Art. Next slide, please. So a site plan that we are proposing for the Bird Street parcel here is a community garden with upwards of 30 plots. Again, we like to build garden plots that are at least 10 by 10 to ensure that people can produce a really great crop of food. 30 plots might not sound like a whole lot, but we like to think it's not feeding just that one person, it's feeding a whole family. So that could be 4 or 5 people. So this garden could feed 120, 150 people. Community gardens can feel semi-private. So we have a 2-person full-time staff of engagement people that regularly host programs, events, and workshops. And that's where you can see in the rear of this garden under the existing shade trees that we will preserve. we are including in this proposal 2 picnic tables and a common area, again, for those programs and events. The garden would also feature a main entrance at the corner of Bird and Alexander, and then on Bird Street, a loading zone for compost deliveries in the spring. I'll elaborate on it a little bit later on, but you can see along Bird and Alexander, we have space for perennial borders. Next slide, please. A little bit about financials. I'll let you read through this yourselves, but I think the main thing I want to highlight again is that we assume most urban sites contain contamination. So we've come in with this, what we think is the higher end of what might be needed here. There are a couple different options of what you can do, again, capping the site or hauling away soil and bringing in fresh new soil. That is typically the most expensive option, and that is what we've budgeted for here. We would use the $150,000 provided in this RFP for garden construction costs, and otherwise we don't need to do any additional fundraising. We have additional grant funding on hand to complete the project. Next slide, please. To get a little bit more about what a garden might look like and talk about those perennial borders I mentioned, again, we would love our garden space to always look attractive all year long. So our borders often feature plants that are blooming at unusual times. Think about a witch hazel blooming in November or hellebore blooming in February or March, or even just an evergreen shrub like an arborvitae or a viburnum. A few plants featured here that often are worked into our perennial borders are 3 beautiful native plants. We produce a lot of our own plants at our native plant nursery in Mattapan, while we also buy in whenever necessary.
Sorry, Jordan, just you're at 10 minutes, so if you could wrap up in just 1 or 2 minutes, that'd be great. Thank you.
Yep. Next slide. Again, just featuring here what a shed might look like or a shade structure and picnic table in the garden, keeping it attractive all year long. Next slide. Maintenance, we rely heavily on our gardeners and coordinators. Featured here are 3 of our coordinators that have been in the garden for well over a decade each. Next slide. Besides those gardeners and coordinators, we also have 4 full-time staff that are out there all season long maintaining the sites, and perhaps most importantly, removing snow whenever it falls in winter. 2 more slides, so next slide, please. We also are a statewide organization, so we can pull in our colleagues from around the state, not only their skill set and depth of knowledge, but their tools featured here, a wood chipper, chipping all the brush we prune in wintertime. And last slide, please. We always rely on volunteers because there's a lot of work to do in the community gardens, maintaining compost, painting fences. We attract everyone from major corporations like Liberty Mutual or MasterCard to high school students like Norfolk Aggie or a job training program like featured here, PowerCore. Thank you. Any questions?
Thanks, Jordan. I'll hand it over to folks if anyone has questions or comments that they would like. And Marco's happy to allow you to facilitate if you'd like to for this.
Yeah, one question. Could you speak to if there's water provided on the site, irrigation, and if there's electrical power as part of the plan on the site?
Yes, thank you. No plan for electrical power, but we do install water service. So there will be a spigot featured regularly throughout the garden. Typically, we have spigots no more than 25 feet, which is your typical hose length. And we turn that off. It's on in the garden typically from late March through early November.
Yeah, and could you just talk about how big the area is around the 2 picnic tables?
Well, we would definitely work with the community to figure out how big of a space they need, but we would love to be able to host events. So that's something that we would decide if we were awarded this project.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, if I can add to that, we typically this is, a draft design, we would bring in a designer, we'd host, typically 2 to 3 committee meetings, go through the process before we finalize what the garden looks like, because, every garden grows differently and has different needs.
Thank you.
I have a couple of questions, because based on what I heard, Jordan, you mentioned at the Winthrop Garden that you brought in an additional 2 feet of soil to cap the, how do you manage that around the borders, the property borders? And do you have any cases where you've had like runoff from having a higher level?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when we bring in the soil, we want it level with the adjacent sidewalk. So there shouldn't be any runoff. Again, if we do, we have that staff that can address it. A lot of times there is some curbing along the borders as well, but it shouldn't be above the sidewalk. So there shouldn't be any runoff.
We'll also, I think what we want to say, there's also some level of excavation there to make
Yes.
room for the volume. We also work with the BU School of Public Health, so they are giving us, besides the LSP, professional recommendations on specific remediations depending on the site conditions.
And you mentioned on the budget that you have the funds to be able to move forward with that. Okay.
Yeah, so we have a grant to undergo garden expansion at this moment in time.
Mhm.
And we're looking to build an additional couple hundred plots throughout Boston.
I know that the site, the Bird Street site, well, I had a couple questions because I didn't see any space for like a tool shed, and I know that's important. Yeah. But so hopefully they'll be getting one. But the question was, so the terrain is sort of not level either, right? So is there a similar plan that would probably go into that to level it? And just make it accessible to any kind of gardener or what?
Yeah, those are two great questions. So the shed did not work its way into that rendering, but we would want to include a shed. That's in almost all of our gardens. And also in the budget, I believe there was a line item for retaining walls. We do acknowledge that there is a slope to the site, so we have budgeted for the retaining wall.
Just sharing that picture so folks can see the slope.
Yeah, thank you. Are there any other questions that folks here have of this?
I do have a couple of questions I'd like to ask, although I know we want to go relatively quickly. Specifically, could you speak to the materials that would be used for the pathways in terms of the use of permeable versus impermeable surfaces?
Yeah, so we have used permeable concrete before. If it fits into the budget, it's something we would do. Yeah. Vijay, I don't know if you have anything else to add on that.
I think that we're aware that the city requires now for all the water runoff to be, addressed within the site boundaries. And, we've done that before and we'll continue to do that. And yeah, as much as permeable surfaces we can use for sure. Permeable concrete is a good option. I think the one thing you have to watch out for is, the pores actually do fill up over the years. So like in, 7, 8, 10 years, it's kind of the same as performing the same as I've seen as just regular concrete, but you can hose it down, you can clean it, and it can, it can go a little bit longer.
Great, thank you. And then could you speak a little bit more to the diversity and inclusion plan in terms of the contracting and hiring of suppliers for the project?
Well, so we always engage in the bidding process, so we'd be sure to reach out to companies that are owned by minorities or women and find the right company that fits the building needs for the site.
Would there be any, just related to that, would there be any opportunity for maybe neighbors to also comment and share about local contractors that may be in the community?
Absolutely, we would love to get any feedback on that as well.
Yeah, that's actually usually the best way it works because then the neighbors hold them accountable.
Yeah.
At the Nightingale Garden on Park Street in Dorchester, it's one of our biggest ones. The contractor actually is one of the abutters. And the neighbors wanted him to take it on, and we did. And he overlooks the garden now and enjoys his work every day.
And
Right.
one final question, could you speak to the current community engagement done prior to the submission of the RFP response and current community support for the project?
Yeah, so we knocked on a lot of doors. We brought out our design. We asked people what they were looking for. We had a lot of feedback about what's been there for years, and yeah, people are open to the green space and they like the idea of the community garden.
Right, great.
I had a couple of questions, and maybe it's more like for Teresa or like the teams here. Like, what are the options for the quote unquote paved areas for the pathways? Is it strictly concrete? Is it that compacted sand stuff or sandstone or whatever it is, stone dust? So are there any preferred sort of things by the city?
Yeah, it's a good question. So per our development standards, we do ask that proposals limit the use of impermeable surfaces as well as create as much accessibility in terms of ADA accessibility as possible. And so we work with our colleagues at various city departments to ensure that the materials are accessible. So that can mean a variety of different materials from semi-permeable pavers to adequate stone dust that meets accessibility requirements. There are lots of options though that we leave up to the specific choices are left up to the developers.
I also just noticed that, I mean, I know that the Article 89 requires that there be some kind of like ditch and gravel put so that, again, to control some of the runoff. But like I didn't see any like rain gardens or swales of sorts. I think that, you know, rain or stormwater is a big issue now, right? And so it also wasn't in the RFP to sort of encourage people to think about, you know, how do you manage and take advantage of stormwater, right? So it's a comment, but it's also a question as to whether that's something that could be considered.
Yeah, Jordan, do you want me to address it? You can address it too, for sure.
Sure, I was just gonna say, rain gardens are a feature of our number of our gardens, including the Winthrop Street Garden when we rebuilt it. The plants that I was beginning to highlight, the butterfly weed and the chokeberries, those are common rain garden plants because they naturally grow in wetland areas where they experience drier conditions and wetter conditions. So those perennial borders along Alexander and Bird could be designed as rain gardens to absorb any rainwater before it hits the street or sidewalk.
And
Thank
I
you.
would I would just add that some communities want rain barrels, some don't, and we provide it if you want it.
Thank you. Renee, you have your hand up.
Sure, thank you. So one of the requests in the RFP is protection of the space through a community land trust. I'm not very familiar with the trustees. So can you explain how you plan to comply with that?
Sure. So the trustees is actually the nation's first land trust. We're very proud of that. So what it means is if we take ownership of a land, we are putting it under our protection permanently. So the space is permanently protected in perpetuity with no terms. And I think we were at like I think we're the largest owner of community gardens in Boston right now. We have 56 of them and we're looking to expand. And we also have the largest share of waterfront, in the Commonwealth, more than even DCR. And it, puts the onus definitely on us for making sure that these places are protected, not only for community use, but also for, environmental and climate justice efforts. So we work with a lot of the city and state jurisdictions to make sure these are all in place with all our properties.
Thank you.
Okay, so I don't see any other hands up. So I think, Teresa, we're ready for the second presentation.
All right, absolutely. Thank you.